Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started since it is 1 o'clock. We'll call to order the May 22nd meeting of the Air Quality Technical Committee. We'll get to agenda approval in a second. Why don't we do, I'm really excited to do introductions today, so why don't we get started there, because I've got some help finally. But Andy Gunning with PPACG.
Sam Bailey, the new environmental planner from PPACG. Excuse me.
Brand new, just started on Monday, so we'll talk more about transition. Today's going to be the official handing off of all the duties to Samantha.
Yeah.
So.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Ryan Trujillo, City of Springs.
Brandon,
Go ahead.
Brandon Fellner with Fort Carson.
Jenny Phillips, PPACG.
Rich Young with Fort Carson Air Quality Program.
Marla Lucky, Environmental Health with El Paso County Public Health.
Chris Welch, Colorado Springs Utilities.
And Yara Crick, City of Manito Springs.
Sierra Club and the Beyond Coal campaign.
All righty, thank you everybody for coming. A little bit of a different agenda today. We're going to swap things around a little bit on the agenda, if that's okay with everybody. Dana Wojtak from CDPHE is on her way down with two folks from her office to talk about the monitors and forecasting that CDPHE does for ozone. They're probably stuck in traffic in the gap, but they should be here. She said she's running about 5 to 10 minutes late. But once she gets here, a large part of this agenda is going to be stuff that they're going to cover and questions that we've had in the past as far as how the short-term ozone forecasts are put together, what goes into that, and then how we can use those as well. So before we do that, we've got a few other things we were going to update on around the conversation we had last month when we talked with you all, plus public information folks and public affairs folks from the different jurisdictions and military installations around public awareness and public outreach. We've got a long list of things we're kind of chipping away at, making a little bit of progress, I think, bit by bit, now that Samantha's on board officially as of this week. You'll see her as kind of taking the lead with all of this stuff and being our main taskmaster and reaching back out to you all to figure out how we build up our stakeholder list, our spokespersons list. We talked about putting together a list of spokespeople that can maybe shoot short videos for us that can speak to the value of clean air throughout the region. We're lining up folks like the mayor from the Colorado Springs, Chamber and EDC executive director, and a whole bunch of other folks that are pretty well known in the community that can speak to the value of keeping clean air and pushing that out through our social media networks, not just the PPACG, but with all of our partners, and getting it out on different avenues as well. So with that as well, we've been working on the website, and Jenny's going to kind of walk us through what we've got as far as a draft website. It's not public yet, but still looking for feedback, and we're hoping now that Samantha's on board, we can get that polished up in the next few days to the next week or so, and ideally get that published pretty soon. And we've also got another publication or short handout that we've been working on as well that Jenny and Jessica can maybe kind of walk us through. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jenny. You want to show us what you've been working on?
Yep. As of the last meeting, we kind of discussed we'd like to have, we were trying to convene all of our resources and be able to be the one-stop shop for getting the information out for people. So this is kind of the base of what we've come up with. It'll be an environmental page for air quality. The three top things that we kind of really were hitting on last meeting were we want to be able to have people sign up for air alerts and be air aware. So that would be this first button. The second one was how to get resources and tips for those people, which would be this button. And then to see current air quality, exactly what's going on in the region, I should say, for air quality. So those were just kind of the three buttons that we came up with. Just a basic overview of what we're actually going to be doing as a kind of a mission and general idea statement. Again, air quality, what our region actually is doing right now. Again, hitting on the let's sign up for alerts. We'd like to get a a longer list and really kind of broaden our horizons with our partners. And what we're thinking about for this section is actually being able to click on these links, click on the actual icons, and it would take you to their page to exactly where their initiatives are for air quality. So if it's the chamber, what are they looking at doing? It's UCCS, the stability, sustainability group for the county, those kind of things. So that would be a big piece of this. We'd like to have our news articles, so the Gazette and Independent and all the different articles that we have through the military. I know that Schriever and Peterson have both, I guess, put out articles. So pulling all of those resources and putting them on our website as well. Linking back to them. We're not going to be hosting it, obviously. We're going to be linking it to their website, back to their own website. Again, we're convening the information. We're not actually creating too many things that are new and innovative. We're asking people to do that for us, right? If there's events in the area about air quality, if there's things that we can do, if there's all sorts of actual happenings that are going on in our area, we'd like to have those there. And then we'd like to have we're going to try to pull all of our air-aware resources together. So where to, these are just a few examples, but how to change your commute or carpool, public transportation options, bicycles, all these things are great, but also things like lawn and garden. Pulling these categories together, we discussed having kind of a resource for not only for the providers that are actually going to be kind of pushing this out, such as the chamber or the county, but also for individual citizens as well. This would be a resource for them. So trying to get all of that into one web page or to one resource is kind of challenging, but I think we're up for the task. So, any questions so far? When does it go live? We are going to try to push it, as Andy said, probably in the next week or two.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a work in progress, and it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be fully built out before everything goes live, but want to make sure we can vet it and also have the committee take a look at it when it's maybe in draft form and provide some feedback, but go live maybe by June 1, early June, in that time
Yep.
frame.
You want suggestions for partnering organizations?
Yes.
So as alum of CC, that has
Yes.
been around for almost 100 years, more than UCCS,
Mm-hmm.
suggest you might want to have them as well.
Yes. All of the colleges are a great resource. We're trying to get a laundry list of partners put together, and that way we can share it out as well as on our website, but kind of share with the committee.
So we email those to you.
Yes, email them to Samantha. She, you gave, I think, did you pick up a card from Samantha? Okay, yeah. So Samantha's our new environmental guru. So she's going to be taking all of those and putting those together. Yes. Any other?
Yes, my question will be the link that takes people to the data and alerting. Is this going to be a link that redirects people to another website that allows for it, or will you be actually aggregating the data and working with it and displaying it?
Yeah, we are going to try to work actually with just getting the link and redirecting people to make sure, and again, vetting this information through our partner groups to understand which information is actually legitimate and where we're actually sending people is legitimate is part of this process, and that's what Samantha has really been a big part already in.
Yeah, and it's a timely question because that's what we're going to talk about today as far as where to go for the forecasting data that the state compiles and making sure that everybody's going to the same site to see what the short-term forecast looks like and so forth. So as we build out the site, we'll make sure we connect to where the public needs to go. Okay. So while we're on public awareness, Jessica, you want to give a quick update on where we are with the other handout you've been working on?
So at our last meeting, you all discussed having a bookmark with some basic steps of what to do. So we've been working on that. See if I can make that a little bit smaller. Right now, the text is still getting shortened a whole lot. It's pretty text heavy, and that's something that we're working on. But it's going to look something like this, where it's got information on what is ozone and why is it a problem, and then the simple steps. Be aware of the air quality index, take simple steps. So we should have this finalized before the end of this week, and it, like the website, will go out to the committee for the chance to review and look at and make suggestions.
Does this include both examples of how you can prevent and also protect yourself from ozone exposure? Or is it mainly steps you can do to lower the creation of ozone?
Right now, it's prevention rather than protection.
Okay, and will you be including that as well?
In this bookmark, probably not, but in future documents, longer ones, almost definitely. Because one of the big tips that comes up a lot is when the ozone's really bad, stay inside. Don't go for walks and runs next to your highway.
And that will be included in
I don't think it will be included in this one, but will be included in longer things.
I think it would be really helpful to put those bullet points really right up front and center, because as it becomes an increasing problem for elders and for youngsters, who was it that had the maxim that, when you're out in ozone, it's like what, fire to your lungs or whatever?
Sunburn.
Yeah, the sunburn.
Yeah, a really bad sunburn. So I would just urge that some protection messages be upfront and nicely illustrated as quickly as possible as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for the input.
Okay, well, good. And we'll get drafts of these out to the committee for your feedback, but like Jessica said and Jenny mentioned, we want to get these things wrapped up so as we get into peak ozone season in June especially, we want to have some products we can start handing out and places that we can start directing folks to. Anything else, any questions, suggestions, public awareness, outreach-wise? So otherwise, we're going to dive into the heart of our agenda. Okay. We can do introductions, certainly, because you all know Dina, but we don't know the guests that she's brought down here today. But why don't we go around the table one more time real quick and just do introductions so we all know who we're meeting with. Andy Gunning with PPACG.
Sam Bailey, the new environmental planner for PPACG.
Ryan Trujillo, City of Colorado Springs.
Brandon Fellner, Fort Carson.
Rich Young, also with Fort Carson.
Erica Alanis Sunger, Schriever Air Force Base.
Rick Coffin, partner with the Air Division of
Gordon Pierce, Technical Services Program at PCD.
Scott Landis, I supervise the meteorology and prescribed fire unit at CDPHE.
Dina Boytock with the Building and Policy Program at CDPHE. Marla Lucky with El Paso County Public Health.
Chris Welch with Colorado Springs Utilities.
And Yara Crick with City of Manitou Springs.
Well, welcome. We've been meeting pretty actively now for the past couple of months, started back up in January as we started bumping into ozone issues, and it got on our radar that we're kind of getting closer to the threshold, and had some really good conversations with Dina. First couple of months when we were getting organized down here, a lot of questions have come up about monitoring sites and how we put together forecasts and all that good stuff, so really appreciate your guys' willingness to come down and share some information. We've got kind of a special meeting today as well. We're going to break at 2:30, and we're bringing in, we invited area meteorologists and weather people from the local media, print and TV, just to get them up to speed on what's going on as well, and see if we can engage with them as a partner to help us get the word out to the public, to let them know that this is a public health issue, and let people know what they can do to reduce emissions on their own so we can kind of stay out of non-attainment, ideally. So it's timely. So I really appreciate you all coming down. And you want to take it from here, or do we have presentations we need to load up? We can take a quick break to put in a thumb drive. And Jenny can help you get loaded up as well here.
You had it.
used to looking for a green light, not a red one. So I've been down here more January and February timeframe. There are a lot of questions that came up that I couldn't necessarily answer, and I needed to bring experts, and so I did that this time. So first, I believe, is Gordon Pierce is going to be speaking, giving you some more background on ozone. Some of it is a refresher, but he's also going to talk about monitoring, siting, and then the data that we've seen and some studies that have been done. And then Scott Landis is going to talk a little bit about the voluntary forecasting that he's been doing. So I'm going to hand it over to them.
It's easier to, you really can't see the screen as well from there. If you want to present from the podium, that's fine as well, whatever you're more comfortable doing.
Either way.
Okay.
I've got a copy here so you can follow along too. Yeah. That's fine. Don't worry. And will you advance the slides then, or you will? Okay. Okay, thanks. Okay, so wanted to give you a presentation today on what's going on as far as ozone down here in the Springs area and forecasting that we do. So to start out, ozone formation. Ozone's a little different than a lot of the other criteria pollutants that we monitor for. It's not directly emitted. You need hydrocarbons, volatile organic compounds is the other term you'll hear, along with oxides of nitrogen, and typically reacting together in sunlight to create ozone. And you can get some ozone from like lightning, but as far as high ozone, what we'll get is hydrocarbons and NOx reacting in sunlight. Just a couple of diagrams. You can see on the bottom right, it's not a complex, and it's a very complex chemical process. It's not just a simple one, and it's not a linear process either. You can actually increase or decrease either NOx or VOCs and get an increase in ozone, depending on what your mix is within the area. So it's not one that's that easy to control. A lot of your emissions, really, when you're looking at VOCs and NOx, are going to be combustion related. Motor vehicles are a prime example. You'll get both NOx and VOCs out of your tailpipes. Industry, power plants, for instance, will give you some NOx. Other combustion sources, any of your home heating, you're going to get NOx out of your gas-fired furnaces. Oil and gas production is certainly a big issue for us in northeast Colorado. And vegetation is another big one that you don't necessarily think about. Vegetation emits a lot of VOCs, pinene, terpenes, isoprene, things like that. So ever go up to a ponderosa pine and smell it? It smells like vanilla. That's a vanilla, and it's a volatile organic compound that you're smelling. Needing sunlight, we typically see the highest ozone concentrations in the summer. We can get some wintertime ozone, not in this area. We sometimes see it out in northwest Colorado as part of the Uinta Basin, where there's a lot of oil and gas production. When there's snow cover on the ground and when you get a deep inversion, you're essentially kind of doubling the impact of the sunlight with it reflecting off the snow, and you can get high ozone. Not an issue in this area, though. So next slide. One of the other big things we have to deal with is, and it's a big subject of debate with EPA and others, is how to deal with it, if we can really, is background ozone. So EPA has defined it as any ozone formed from sources or processes other than U.S. man-made emissions of nitrogen oxides, VOCs, methane, and carbon monoxide, and specifically referred to as U.S. background. So this would include all of your biogenic from vegetation, wildfire, NOx and VOCs, things like that. From modeling EPA has done, and you can see a little map of the modeling that they've done on here. So the red is the higher concentration ozone. You can see that background ozone is particularly an issue in the western U.S. And specifically very much so in the Rocky Mountain region. East Coast, it's not that much of an issue. But for modeling they've done, only 30 to 40% of ozone in Colorado is due to anthropogenic sources. So 50 to 60% is not sources that we can really control. So that's an issue that we have to deal with. They did come out with a white paper back in 2016, and from what they've modeled for sites here in Colorado Springs, 90% was due to background. It was a little odd, that one, I think, the way some of that modeling came out, so I'm not quite convinced on that, but the 50 to 60% not due to anthropogenic emissions from Colorado, I can certainly go along with that. The other one that you'll hear about is international transport, as also being a source. From modeling that's been done, we haven't done any for the Springs, but for the North Front Range of Colorado, and I'd expect it to probably be similar down here. 5 to 8 parts per billion can come from international transport, sources in Asia, Mexico, Canada, things like that.
So while you're on that, if I could ask real quick.
Sure.
So what, if anything, can be done about that? I mean, from a regulatory standpoint, I guess we're kind of stuck with it, and it's
right now we are.
Our calculation.
Yep. Right now we are. It's just part of the ozone concentration.
Okay. We can't claim, and it's probably not an exceptional event, but I guess that does occur with other things like wildfires potentially, but you can't get any kind of an exemption for something like that that's coming in from the outside.
There is one provision that's in the Clean Air Act, 179B, that talks about international emissions, that those can be accounted for. We have, Governor Polis has specifically directed us that we're not to look at that at this point in time, and rather to focus on reducing ozone levels. So looking at what are the sources here in Colorado Springs. So looking at the VOCs to start with. The pie chart on the left is specific for El Paso County, and then the bar chart on the right includes other counties, both that are in the PPA-CG area, so includes Teller and Park County, and I know only part of Park County is in, but this is the whole county. You can see on the right-hand side that the Colorado Springs, El Paso County is certainly the biggest portion versus the other two counties. And you can see that what they call natural resources, the biogenic, it's kind of the middle bars there, is the biggest portion, and that shows up for El Paso County on the left. The reddish portion is all natural biogenic sources. So that is the biggest source of VOCs, and that's pretty typical for Colorado. The other two big portions there, the blue is highway vehicles, mobile sources, and then the green portion is solvent usage, so from different industrial sources. On the next slide, if we look at oxides of nitrogen, once again, El Paso County far dwarfs the other two counties, but the big blue portion, once again, highway vehicles. It's a very big portion for the NOx, biggest portion for the NOx, half of the sources in El Paso County. And then that's followed by, in the orangish pie portion, is electric utilities, so that'd be the power plants. And obviously the two big ones are going to be Drake and Nixon, but then it would also include some of the smaller ones that are in the area. And then the kind of the brownish portion is off-highway vehicles, so that gets in more to more your construction equipment, dozers, things like that. So those, if you look at highway vehicle, what we can control or what's anthropogenic and what's man-made, highway vehicles are both certainly the biggest portions for both NOx and VOC. So that's kind of looking at what are the sources of the ozone precursors here in the area. Then on the next slide, we'll start moving a little more into the monitoring section. So as far as ozone standards, we're currently operating under two standards. There's the older 2008 standard of 75 parts per billion. And then when in 2015, they came out with a new standard, a lower standard of 70 parts per billion. Due to some lawsuits, typically what they do is they'll revoke the old standard, but due to a lawsuit that's going on, the old standard was not revoked. So we have to meet the requirements of both. Effectively, we go more by the stricter standard, so the 70 part per billion standard is going to override, especially in an area that's currently in attainment. That's the one you're going to want to look at. In Denver, since we're non-attainment, we have to deal with plan requirements for both. They're both defined as the 3-year average of the daily fourth maximum 8-hour values. So if you look at a year, you've got 365 possible daily maximum 8-hour values. You take the fourth highest value from 3 subsequent years and average those together to determine if you're meeting the level of the NAAQS, the National Ambient Air Quality Standard. Health effects for ozone, primary thing is airway irritation and lung function. So for people with asthma, emphysema, bronchitis, those are the ones that are going to certainly be impacted the most. EPA sets the level of the standard to protect the most sensitive populations, so these levels should protect those, though there's evidence out there, certainly a number of studies that indicate the level could be lower, then there may not be any safe level. Other people argue it should be higher, so it's kind of all over the board there. But so people who are active outside, if you're really breathing heavily there, they'll certainly be impacted higher, and that's why we get into some of our messaging, or the messaging that if it's a high ozone day, stay indoors, don't avoid prolonged exertion, things like that. So next slide. What are the monitoring requirements for this area? So for the Colorado Springs MSA, the Metropolitan Statistical Area, population is a little over 700,000. Based on that, EPA has a required number of sites for between 350,000 and 4 million. They look at 2 sites if the most recent 3-year design value concentration, that's the 3-year average, if it's greater than 85% of the NAAQS, or only 1 site if it's less than 85% of the NAAQS. Oh, here we're over 85%, so we've got 2 sites in operation, so we do meet the minimum required number of sites. The monitoring season that EPA required used to be, until a couple of years ago, or until the 2015 standard came out, actually was only April through September. At that point, though, they changed it to make us year-round. And they did that based on where we're at in relation to the standard in each of the months of the year. And as the standard has come down, we've just been getting over that threshold. So we're now year-round as a requirement for monitoring. Next slide. Just a quick look at where all of our sites are across Colorado. As you can see, most of them are focused in the Denver North Front Range area, which is our ozone non-attainment area. There's a kind of a purplish line that kind of outlines it. Douglas County is the south end. And you can see that that's pretty much where all of our non-attaining monitors are, all the ones that are above the level of the standard. Everything else in blue or green is below the level of the standard. So everywhere else in Colorado is doing okay. Next slide. Specific to the Colorado Springs area, we've had 5 monitors down here in the past. Or actually, we've had 4, and the Colorado Springs Utilities has had 1 in the past. So back, starting all the way back in 1975, we had a site on South Tejon, just south of downtown. That was also a carbon monoxide monitoring site at the time. That ended in 1997 when the lease on the building was lost. We also had a site on North Chestnut off Garden of the Gods Road. And once again, that site was lost in 1996 when the owner of the land developed it. It's now kind of sitting in the middle. The site would be in the middle of a parking lot right now. From those sites, though, we established our 2 current ones, our Air Force Academy site up to the north by the south entrance, and then the Manitou Springs site. Colorado Springs Utilities did have a site for a number of years, 7 years, down at Pinello Ranch by Security on the south side of town, just south of Academy there. Not Academy, I think it's Academy Boulevard, actually, that goes around the south there. So the 2 sites where we put in place to meet what we felt would be maximum concentration areas based on meteorology for the area. Similar to Denver, where we get upslope conditions. You'll notice, if we just go back, well, in Denver, all of our high ozone is typically right along the foothills. And that's because of summer upslope conditions. We get convection heating, pulls all the VOCs and NOx out towards the foothills where it just kind of sits and percolates in the sunlight. So we get most of our high concentrations along the foothills from south side of Denver all the way up to the west side of Fort Collins. Similar type meteorological situation here where everything will get pulled more towards the higher terrain, so up valley. So that's why we established once the Air Force Academy site up Monument Creek and then the Manitou site up Fountain Creek. And both set to sort of towards the foothills there where we can be good for population exposure as well to protect, so we can see what individuals are really being exposed to.
We've got the Palmer Divide kind of right at the county line, El Paso and Douglas. Does that kind of provide a bit of a barrier to keep the stuff from the Denver area there, and then we're kind of producing our own, except for the stuff that's coming in from the outside and overseas?
It can, not always, but it can provide somewhat of a barrier, and I think Scott will talk about that more in a little while.
Two different airsheds, but they share sometimes.
Okay. All right.
The next slide. So this is the 3-year summary for the sites here in Colorado Springs. As you can see for the Academy site, and the 3-year averages are circled there, the 3-year average is right at 70 parts per billion, so right at the level of the NACs. And Manitou Springs is 1 ppb behind. The two sites actually track pretty closely with each other as far as levels. What can we get this year? For both sites, we have to have a level, the fourth max 8-hour value of 70 parts per billion or less in order to technically still be in attainment of the NACs and not go up to 71 for a 3-year average. So it is very close. Exceptional events are included in all of these, and I'll talk about those in a few minutes. Next slide. Just for comparison to the Denver area, you can see the numbers are quite a bit higher in the Denver area, 78, 79 parts per billion for the high values at a number of sites there. So Colorado Springs is definitely in better shape than Denver is, which is good news. And then on the next slide, if you look for the rest of Colorado, you can see, and this is all of western Colorado, everything is below, though southwest Colorado, down by the Durango and the Southern Ute sites, they're at 69 for a 3-year average. So they do get quite a bit of oil and gas influence down there from the San Juan Basin. So that's part of their problem down there. Next slide. Now looking at trends, looking at the 3-year average of the fourth max values, and I just went back to 2000 on here on the left-hand graph. You can see there's definitely a cyclical pattern. It's sort of based on meteorology. But overall, and I've put the trend lines in there, there's kind of the finer black lines, there is a downward trend. So that's good news. And we're seeing a downward trend in ozone across Colorado. It's not a very fast downward trend, but at least it is downward and not upward as far as an overall trend. It's interesting, this cyclical nature. We see it along the Front Range of Colorado. We don't see it in western Colorado. I don't know the reason for that. Scott might know a little more than that. But the bottom right-hand slide is what are the fourth maximum values. And it goes back to where we started. The Academy site back in 1997 was the first complete year. We did, for some reason, have a big increase in ozone back then, up to about 2000. I don't know the reason for that, but you know, be what it may, since about 2000 it has been a general downward decline. And on there you can definitely see that you can get some big up and down spikes from year to year. So it does point out you do need many years to see a trend. One thing that's keep in mind too is population has increased quite a bit over time, so the fact that ozone is going down is really a good thing, and I think really kind of points to the fact that motor vehicles have gotten cleaner over time, and that's a lot of it. And you can see in the left-hand slide where the NACs has ratcheted down over time. So back in 1997 is when they established it was 0.08 parts per million. So effectively, with rounding, 0.084 is what the level of that was effectively that standard, so that's why that line is up at 0.084. And then it dropped to 0.075 and then down to 0.070 or 70 parts per billion, the current standard. So are we getting worse? No, we're not getting worse. It has been getting better over time. Next slide. So exceptional events. EPA allows for events when in specific for events that are not reasonably controllable or preventable and they're not caused by human activity. So, and what happens is when we can document these events, and if EPA concurs on them, they will flag them, and then those data do not get used as part of your the 3-year calculations. So specifically for ozone, these events are stratospheric intrusions where ozone from the stratosphere, where we do want ozone to protect us from UV radiation, when that gets, especially with storms in the springtime, we see quite a few stratospheric ozone intrusions down here in the spring, March, April timeframe is when we typically see them down here. But when a storm will drag the ozone down from the stratosphere down to ground level. Obviously, that's something we have no control over. It's all meteorological based. The other thing is with the type of exceptional event that we can get for ozone is with wildfire smoke, in particular when the smoke is from long-range transport. If there's wildfires nearby, such as the ones that happened in the Springs, on the west side of the Springs, those are pretty close, and typically what's going to happen is the organics in there and the nitrogen oxides will react with ozone and scrub it out. And so you'll actually get decreased ozone. Plus you'll get a decrease in sunlight just from all the smoke, and that'll decrease your ozone levels. With long-range transport, however, you get what's called the aged smoke. So the smoke itself has had time to react, all the VOCs in the smoke, the NOx, and create ozone. So you can get actually ozone within the smoke plumes coming in. And we've seen that particularly in Denver, where you get sudden increases in ozone, and it's due to wildfire smoke. Once again, that's something we can't control, so EPA has provisions to where we can exclude these data. They're pretty long write-ups that we have to do. They end up typically being 100-plus pages per event, so it's not something we really like to do. It takes a lot of time to do them. And unless it has some actual regulatory effect, i.e. it's going to change a designation or on an area, something like that, EPA won't even look at them. So we could write them up for the Springs at the moment for the past few years. It wouldn't make any difference.
Quick question. And when you say long haul, are they coming from the western slope or Arizona or
Could come from the western slope. A lot of the times it's coming from the Pacific Northwest or California. Okay. That far. Okay. Yeah. If we did, and if you look in the right text, the red text on the bottom right-hand side, if we did remove all the wildfire and stratospheric ozone intrusion events for the last 3 years, it would drop it down about 3 ppb at both sites. So would it have an effect? It would. Is it worth doing? No, certainly not at the moment, since EPA wouldn't look at them, but it is an option that is out there. And we have written up events, certainly for areas in the past, not only for ozone, but also for, not for this area, but for other areas for particulates. Next slide. One other thing that we are doing is we do conduct summer ozone studies. These we do in areas where we've had no monitoring in the past, and we want to figure out if it's an area where we do need to install monitoring, if there's any problems. Where there's just limited monitoring and we're not sure if the site's necessarily in the right location. If a site needs to get moved, use it to see where might be the best place to put a new location. And then just for local concerns as well. They're non-regulatory data, so they can't really be used for decision making. They're more just kind of indicative of where would be the best place to put a monitor type of thing. Not that they're bad quality data, but we don't follow all the required QA procedures that EPA requires, and they're only for a few months, so it doesn't cover the whole year. And as you can see, we started back in 2015 in Pueblo. Typically for these, we'll put out anywhere from 5 to 7 monitors in an area. then Grand Junction, then the Denver area. In 2018, we did do the Colorado Springs area. And then this year, we're doing the Southwest Colorado area. And you can see a picture of what the monitors look like, most of them. The nice part is that they're solar powered, so they're easy to put out anywhere. Not having line power is good. The bad part is you can't necessarily put a permanent monitor there for the future, just if there's no line power. Next slide. So for the Colorado Springs area, you can see where all the sites are that we put in. And then what the fourth max values were from those sites, plus Academy and the Manitou sites. As you can see, if you go up more, certainly up towards Rampart, that area, you do see some higher values that you can get up there. We do see higher ozone concentrations with higher elevations across Colorado. And also as you move away, as you have more reaction time for some of the VOCs and NOx as well. So a lot of the reason we ended up looking at doing a study in Colorado Springs is with our Academy site. Access to that site is problematic at the moment. A couple of years ago, where we're at, the Air Force Academy put some big boulders across the road to preclude public access back to the old shooting range area. The problem is it's about a quarter mile now for us to hoof our equipment back to the site. If it's just a daily visit or something, it's not a problem, but when you're having to haul, when you're doing calibrations or audits and you're having to haul about 150 pounds of equipment, it gets kind of problematic. Or when we need to do any maintenance on get people in to maintain the air conditioner or anything. So we've been looking at that, whether we need to move that site. Obviously, with us being very close to the NACs at the moment, it's not something we want to do. We want to keep it until we can know if that site's going to keep showing attainment, or if it's going to go over this next year based on values this summer. So we're going to keep it where it is certainly for this summer, and then look at whether it's better to move it to a different area. But this study gives us some information as to might it be better to move to a different area. If we're looking for population protection, maybe something more towards Black Forest or Monument might be a better location. Still have some population around it. Obviously, Rampart is a little higher, but concentration-wise, but there's no population really up there, and getting power into a lot of areas up there gets really problematic as well. And I should note that all of these values also include some of the exceptional events from wildfire smoke influences that occurred in 2018 as well. So those have not been backed out of these data.
What would be some of the reason for Rampart to be, the outlier?
I think a lot of it is you don't have any population around there, so you're not getting anything that's quenching your ozone. That's one thing. If you're in urban areas, you're always going to have lower ozone, because what we call fresh emissions, so direct emissions of NOx, and especially NOx from like vehicles, will actually react with ozone and destroy the ozone. So in urban areas, you're always going to have lower ozone. We really need to move out, and at least up to a certain point, the further you move out, you're going to get more reaction time for those ozone precursors. As it moves up in elevation, you start getting some of the higher some natural ozone blending in more as well. So those are
counterintuitive, but your explanation is right, spot on.
So that's why some of the reasons up there. Next slide. So just to summarize, the Springs is in attainment for ozone at the moment. We certainly hope it stays that way. We hope levels are a little lower this summer. Based on the way the cyclical nature goes, and from what looks like meteorologically this summer, it could very well be a little lower. So we'll see on that. Time will tell. The trend has been downward over time, so that's really good news. We're certainly going to continue the monitoring at 2 sites, and then continue to investigate the replacement location for Air Force Academy down the road. EPA has started looking at the next round of reviews for the ozone standard. By CFR, they're supposed to review the NACs every 5 years. Historically, they haven't always done that, but they're trying to more these days. So they are hoping to have a decision out by the end of next year. I think the expectation is, given the current administration, that it's likely to remain the same and not go down any further. But we'll see what comes out. You can find real-time all of the ozone data we post hourly on our website, which is listed there. And then if you're looking for the longer term, we upload all of our data once it's been validated to EPA's air quality system. And all of those data you can get on their, a link up to their website there. Any questions as far as the monitoring?
Since it's our lungs that are most affected, do we have any data from the American Lung Association about numbers of people in Colorado who have lung issues?
That have lung
issues.
I don't know. I've not looked at their data to see how many people have lung issues in Colorado, and how it compares to other states. I don't have the answer to that question.
That would be an important historical question, as people used to flock here because of lung diseases.
Right.
We have a really famous National Lung Hospital in Denver.
Yeah, used to be a great.
We had
so many TB cases. Yep.
Would be a valid question for CPPHE to be looking at.
Yeah, I don't know of our disease control and environmental epidemiology division, which looks more at the risk assessment side, if they've done anything or not. Mm-hmm.
I had a question on transportation is the number one producer of NOx. But how does that compare when you have a dispersed system, obviously? People are driving all over the place versus, say, a point source. Could you comment on that? Just the difference between diffusion of all the highway sources versus point sources and its contribution to the two monitors that we have?
Well, obviously, the central Colorado Springs area, you're going to obviously get a lot of motor vehicle emissions from there, plus industry from that area. As you get out into some of the dispersed, it will, with upslope conditions, can pull certainly emissions from motor vehicles from further away up towards the foothills. We don't want to monitor right next to a highway where we're getting fresh NOx, because we would see lower values, and that's not something we want to do. I don't know if that helps, and it's.
Well, and then I sort of had a follow-up question. You had said sometimes when you reduce NOx, you can actually get a higher ozone reading. I guess this is not meant to be a hostile question, and it really isn't. But so why do we ask people to reduce NOx if indeed reducing NOx can sometimes end up increasing ozone?
Depending on what the area is, urban areas tend to be more what we call VOC limited, where there's less VOCs. You can react to all the VOCs, but you can't use all the NOx as part of the reaction process. Contrary, in rural areas, you tend to be more NOx limited. There's not enough. You can react to all the NOx, but there's way more VOCs, and those don't get all reacted. So it really depends where you're at. We try and look at trying to reduce both, to be quite honest, as being a lot of the best strategies. Not only do you get, even if ozone doesn't necessarily decrease a tremendous amount, you at least get the benefits of reducing NOx and VOC exposures on people as well, so better for public health that way as well. Yeah, it's a hard one. It is complex, and yeah.
Another question. Just intuitively, I was kind of struck by the statistics that ozone creation, 30 to 40% is due to non-anthropogenic sources. That seems low, given the amount of car concentration, 2 power plants.
Yeah, it's more than that. It's 30 to 40% is due to anthropogenic. And then 50 to 60%, give or take, is non-anthropogenic.
So the background.
Yeah, yeah.
That seems low to me, the first statistic, 30 to 40% is due to human-created ozone. And that includes industry, cars, 2 power plants.
Yeah, and we see the same thing in the Denver area. That's based on modeling that's been done for all of Colorado, not only by EPA, but what we've had done as well. So yeah, and that's part of our problem is we can reduce, and in fact in the North Front Range area of Colorado, we reduced NOx and VOCs by about, I think it was about 30%, but we only saw about a 7% drop in ozone. And that goes right along with, it's because most of it is background, and it can vary from day to day, and that's part of the problem. But yeah,
That's discouraging.
it is, especially when we reduce the anthropogenic emissions that much and we don't see a big drop. Yeah, it does get very discouraging. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Well, thank you. And what we might do, just respectfully, kind of lost control already, but if we, as we're finishing up the presentations, maybe questions from the committee members, and then what we'll do is have questions from the audience and then come up to the podium as well, just so we can get things on the record. And like I said, probably a little too late to kind of gain control, but we're trying to build some better practices, especially as we get in more depth with the work here at the committee. So, okay, well, good. Well, thanks. That's fantastic. Thank you, Gordon. Scott, were you going to take it from here? Yes.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having us here this afternoon. I'm going to talk a bit about our forecast program at CDPHE, some of the products that we put out, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the forecast techniques we use as well, particularly here in the Colorado Springs area, which is different than what we forecast in Denver. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So this is our long-running ozone program. It's the Ozone Action Day Alert Program. We've had this well before I started working for CDPHE, going back a couple decades, I believe. And starting on May 30th, we began issuing these Ozone Action Day alerts. Once a day at 4 p.m., we'll send out either it's an action day or it's not an action day, and we'll continue that every day through the summer through August 31st. A recent development that we've had in the forecast program, previously these alerts ran for 24 hours. So if we issued an Ozone Action Day alert, say ozone was going through the roof, we have to issue an Ozone Action Day alert. We have to do that. Well, it would run from 4 p.m. to 4 p.m. regardless of what was going to happen the next day. So it could be a clean day tomorrow, but we still had to issue that Ozone Action Day alert today through 4 p.m. And one of the consequences of that, from a regulatory standpoint, is when we issue an Ozone Action Day alert, prescribed burning is shut down completely. So a lot of times, the Forest Service, the BLM, private burners, they'll want to, get some prescribed fire on the landscape, and it'll be a clean day for them. But because we issued an Ozone Action Day alert the day before, they were shut down. So one thing we instituted last summer is a midnight expiration time. So now the forecaster has that option. 4 p.m. to midnight, you can shut it off at midnight. But if you think it's going to be a bad day tomorrow as well, keep it going through 4 p.m. to tomorrow. Our primary focus on these has been the health messaging. As for CDPHE, that's our mission. But we also wanted to issue a pollution prevention message in there, because we do want people to know that the actions you take today can have a big effect on what ozone is going to do tomorrow. So if today's a clean day, but we think tomorrow is going to be bad, we'll issue the action day at 4 p.m. today and tell people, start doing these things to reduce your emissions so we can try to get a clean day tomorrow, because right now things, meteorologically at least, are looking like we're going to have a bad ozone day. We disseminate these messages through email on our website. We also have a somewhat antiquated telephone messaging system from the 1990s, which I like because I used it a lot in college. But and people still use it. People still call it up, so we're keeping it. And we are increasingly using social media. We're getting the word out a lot more through Facebook and Twitter now, and a lot more people are being aware of our alerts. Target audience has primarily been the general public, media, public health institutions within the Denver metro area and the Northern Front Range non-attainment area. And as I said before, the regulatory teeth that these alerts have mostly deals with prescribed fire. So if we issue an ozone action day alert, prescribed fire is effectively shut down within the non-attainment area, but on top of that, also shut down in El Paso and Teller counties. And that's because the emissions that occur in El Paso and Teller County can have a direct impact on ozone concentrations in Denver, but also here in Colorado Springs as well. So we want to responsibly not add smoke to an already polluted air mass. Next slide, please. Okay, now this is our second product, our newer product. That's, I would still say, an experimental product. These are the voluntary emission reduction action emails that we send out. We launched this initially in the summer of 2017. And we usually send out 2 or 3 of these per week. They'll become more frequent if it's an especially bad ozone week. We'll send out more of them. And I'll show you in just a moment what one of these look like. But essentially, it's a brief email message and just talking about ozone trends over the next 2 to 4 days. And our real goal here is to identify those high ozone days 2 to 3 days in advance, so folks can take those, they can plan for reducing their emissions.
Who are you sending the emails to?
That is going to be the last bullet point. No problem, no problem. So the messaging emphasis on this has been requesting those voluntary emission reduction actions on the high ozone days that we're targeting. We have an email subscriber list, and initially that target audience was overwhelmingly the oil and gas sector. But over the past year, we've started to see a bit more interest in this, so we have expanded to other industry groups who are interested in these emails. Academia has taken an interest in these as well, along with some various public health agencies. So I think we have close to 200 subscribers now on our email list, and the list keeps growing. Next slide, please. Here's what one looks like. And this is basically, like I was saying, it's very brief. I don't want to get too technical in these emails because lots of folks don't want to hear the technical stuff. They want to know, when's the high ozone going to be? So I try to identify that ideally 2 to 3 days in advance. Ozone forecasting is very difficult. I've been a meteorologist for over 20 years, and forecasting thunderstorms in Oklahoma is a heck of a lot easier than forecasting high ozone here in the Front Range. But we do our best, and there are times when we'll miss, and the day before, things will change dramatically in the course of 24 hours, and I'll have to send one of these out the day before and say, sorry, but I'm only giving you 1 day notice on this, but if you can, I'd still like you to take those voluntary emission reduction actions if you can. I know there's a lot of plan that goes into some of this from various companies, so we try to get them out 2 or 3 days in advance, but at times you have to kind of pull the trigger at the last minute when things change, as the weather often does. Next slide, please. So how often are we sending out these emails? Well, we started the program in 2017, and we started kind of in the early part of the summer, a little later than when the ozone really started cooking. So there was fewer forecast days. The first one we sent out was June 26th of 2017, and that continued through September 5th of 2017. So that's in total 81 forecast days. Of those 81 days, we requested voluntary measures 25 of those days, so roughly 30% of the time. Last year was a bad ozone year. There's no getting around that. So there was 116 forecast days. 44 days we requested emission reductions. So that percentage went up a bit to almost 38%. Next slide. Oh boy, the forecast success rate. Here's where we have to give away all our secrets. So this, I guess, could be arbitrary, depending on how you look at it, what a successful forecast is. Everybody has a different vision of what a successful forecast is. For our group, what we establish as a successful forecast is if one of the monitors in the Northern Front Range had an 8-hour average of 68 ppb or higher. Now, what you're asking, well, that's not the standard. Why isn't your successful forecast if you hit 71 ppb? Well, we think if people are actually taking these emails seriously and everybody's reducing emissions, giving ourselves a 2 to 3 ppb buffer, if it's 68, we can say, hey, it might have been 70 or 71 if we didn't request these actions. So we established 68 as a successful forecast. That being said, in 2017, we were successful about 76% of the time identifying those days with the 8-hour average over 68 ppb. 2018, we took a little step backwards, but not too bad. The success rate was about 72%. And last year was a very difficult year forecasting in general because of the amount of wildfire smoke we had around and just so many days of really conducive days for big ozone production. Next slide, please. Now, of course, if nobody's reading these emails, they don't do a heck of a lot of good, do they? So how much cooperation are we getting from the folks? And we have a couple of ways of finding out about this. We have had some good communication with the Colorado Oil and Gas Association, COGA, and they have described their member companies and some of the actions they are taking when we issue these email alerts. So we feel that there is some progress being made in that front. The one metric I have is I can see how many of these emails are actually being opened. If you're not opening them, obviously you're not acting on them. And you can see that's been kind of a mixed bag, I would say, over the past couple of years. It seems we start off the season okay, 40 to 45% open rate, and then it kind of just stagnates and is steady for the rest of the summer, 35 to 40%. So I'll let you be the judge if you think that's a high email open rate or not. Next slide, please. All right, how do we forecast ozone? So there's been a lot of research done by a lot smarter people than me. And one of the things that has been proven here in the Colorado Front Range is a very strong correlation between 500 millibar heights and summertime ozone concentrations. And basically the 500 millibar heights, the higher it is, the stronger the ridge of high pressure is, usually the higher our ozone concentrations are. So when you get those strong upper level high pressure systems in the summer, what do you get? Most of the time you get clear skies, you get elevated temperatures, you reduce the westerly winds, and westerly winds tend to disrupt ozone production in the Front Range. It can be 100 degrees and you would think ozone's going to go through the roof, but most of the time when it's 100 degrees is because there's a downsloping west wind coming off the mountains. That cleans everything out. So in general, our biggest ozone concentrations will come in the sweet spot temperatures mid-80s to lower 90s. When it starts getting up mid-90s to 100 degrees, normally ozone's a lot lower, which seems counterintuitive, but that's how it works. So we reduce those westerly winds, and we also get relatively deep atmospheric mixing, or what we call lift in the atmosphere, and terrain-driven circulation. So westerly winds are not terrain-driven circulations. They're usually created by some storm system that's coming on through. When we get a big ridge of high pressure over the Front Range region, there's not a whole lot of movement of the winds. The terrain takes over. So that's when we start seeing during the afternoons the winds, the upslope winds that take from the plains up to the mountains. And what Gordon was discussing, it takes all the VOCs, the NOx from the emission sources and drives them right towards the foothills. And that's when we see our highest ozone concentrations. Next slide, please. So I'll start off with what we look for in Denver. This is a Denver cyclone, and if you've never heard of a Denver cyclone, it's usually an area of low pressure that develops generally to the east, northeast of the city of Denver. And what we generally see with this in Denver itself is a very stagnant air mass. So you'll see it might be difficult to kind of interpret what's going on here, but you can see the darker reds and the arrows pointing from south to north. Those are nice southerly winds coming out of the plains. They're usually clean, and they also produce very good mixing. In contrast, you can see the I-25 corridor from Fort Collins southward into Denver. You see some cold air coming on down. And I say cold, I mean relatively cold compared to what we're seeing out in the plains. That northerly wind, or very light wind, will stagnate the air. So what will happen is you'll have all of the emissions from Denver, from the oil and gas fields, all kind of build up during the morning time, and boom, by the afternoon we get upslope flow, and ozone really starts picking up. The next slide, please. And here is this view of the same day. These red lines are what we call back trajectories, and it basically tells you where the air mass came from, where you are, 8 hours before that. And you can see, if you can really squint in there, the biggest ozone concentrations on this day were on the south and southwest side of Denver. Chatfield State Park, Highlands Ranch, we saw 1 hour ozone concentrations up in the 90s. And you can kind of see why, because look where the air mass originated. It originated up in Weld County in the oil and gas fields. That's where it started 8 hours before. All those emissions pushed south during the day, and on top of that, went right through the Denver metropolitan area. So not only are you getting the oil and gas emissions, you're getting everything from the Denver metropolitan area. It's all piling up to the south and west of the Denver metropolitan area, and you get some big ozone exceedances. So when we see a Denver cyclone developing, ozone action day alert, almost no doubt about it. Almost no doubt about it. Now let me talk about Colorado Springs, which is different. So I go to the next slide, please. So these are the 12 ozone exceedances we have seen in Colorado Springs since 2015. Out of those 12, there were some natural influences on 10 of those days. I'm not specifically saying that we would not have had an exceedance without these things, but all I'm saying is on those 12 days, there was something going on other than just anthropogenic ozone. There was wildfire smoke or there was a stratospheric intrusion going on. You'll see 2 days on there where we weren't really able to identify any wildfire smoke or any significant stratospheric intrusion or anything like that. Those are the days that we as forecasters need to be able to identify. When Colorado Springs is going to get an ozone exceedance, that is not due to something that we can see coming down the pike like wildfire smoke coming in or a stratospheric intrusion. Next slide, please. So these are the 2 dates of the past 4 years that we saw exceedances in Colorado Springs. I want you to focus on the south and southwest side of the Denver metropolitan area where the red circles are. Those are 2 of our monitors, so ozone monitors, and you'll see they have readings well up in the 70s. This is the day before the exceedance in Colorado Springs, okay? And you can see the winds, the wind vectors, pointing from the plains and heading up into the foothills. And on this particular day, there was very strong upslope flow. I mean, you can see upslope flow going all the way up into Park County. I mean, there was a very strong upslope component on this day. And you can also see in Colorado Springs the ozone concentrations are not at exceedance level, but they're elevated. They're 66 to 68 ppb at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That ozone is also heading up into the foothills. Next slide, please. Let's turn things around going to 6 o'clock the next morning. Look what the winds are doing. They've completely reversed. This is drainage flow. And this happens very, very frequently here in the Front Range. At night, the winds reverse and they drain from the mountains right back down to the plains. So you had this dirty, polluted air mass that got driven up into the foothills the day before. It's gotten caught up. There's some VOCs. There's NOx. There's also pollution going all the way up into what we call the residual layer, and it's all circulating around. In the morning, it comes back down. And the one thing you might want to notice here, look at Manitou Springs at 6 o'clock in the morning, has an ozone concentration of 53. 53 doesn't seem that high, but at 6 o'clock in the morning, that's pretty darn high. So you've already gotten off to a big start. And the next day, it's going to be hot and it's going to be sunny. Next slide, please. Boom. And there you go. 81 for a ppb at Manitou Springs and 78 at Academy. So ends up being a big day because of that, that scenario. Let's look at the second scenario. Next slide, please. This is one where you can blame Denver. There's a cold front heading in from the north. You've had a big ozone day, either the previous day or you've got pollution up in Denver. You got northerly winds coming from Denver right down into Colorado Springs ahead of a cold front. The winds are strong enough to get up and over the Palmer Divide and what we were talking about, sharing air masses, which doesn't happen all the time, but it does. And in this particular situation, look at how much higher Academy is than the other monitors, and that includes Academy. If you look at the winds around Manitou, or around Academy, which are coming from the north, which are coming from Denver. You can't tell quite as much in Manitou because the wind vectors are a lot lighter. But if I move this map down a bit, they're coming out of the south-southeast. They're coming out of a relatively cleaner air mass than. So you basically have a dividing line going right across Colorado Springs. You have up at Academy 9 ppb higher at the same time of the day. So those are the things that we as forecasters really need to identify. And it's not always easy to do, but we try. Next slide, please. Now, what's it looking like this summer? So as Gordon was talking about, some of the long-range forecasts are looking promising, thanks to our good friend El Nino. We are, right now, temperatures are, right now looking for the June, July, August time period to be average or below average for normal. But what we really like to see is that precipitation to the right. We are anticipating, and we've already seen it this spring. It's been wet, it's been cold, and we're hoping that continues this summer. Not good for our gardens, but good for ozone. Above average precipitation is forecast throughout much of the Intermountain West during the June, July, August time period. So we'll keep our fingers crossed on that. Next one. Now, of course, that's going to have a big influence on something else that creates ozone, which is wildfire smoke. So this is the forecast from the National Interagency Fire Center. Also, with that increase in precipitation, we are anticipating below average wildfire activity in Colorado. The bad news here, West Coast is anticipating above average wildfire activity. And as we talked about, aged wildfire smoke can also be a problem for us. So you can see from the Pacific Northwest down through California, desert Southwest, they actually had, at least in California, a pretty wet late winter, early spring, which you'd think would be a good thing. But it enhanced green up very quickly, and now they're expecting things to dry back out. So you have all that new fresh vegetation that's grown from the wet winter and spring, and it's going to cure, and it's going to dry, and probably more fires for California. And that could have an influence on us, depending on the transport winds of the summer. So something we'll have to watch for. Yes?
Prediction relative to last summer, which, as we all know, was quite a disaster.
Yes.
Yes, as bad as?
So as far as...
California, as bad as last year's wildfire season. What's the prediction?
I would say there's... From what the National Interagency Fire Center is saying, and from what I've seen in the long-range forecast, there's the potential for wildfires. You can never predict fully about wildfires because of the human influence and human-started wildfires. That can never be predicted. So I would just say there's that potential for another big wildfire season in California, and something we'll watch closely here in Colorado. Next slide. Okay, how to sign up for air quality alerts. If you just want a very basic Colorado Springs ozone and fine particulate forecast, you can get that through EnviroFlash, which is the EPA's Air Now website. That forecast is coming from us. So we forecast for Colorado Springs 365 days a year. We forecast ozone and fine particulates, and we upload that to Air Now. You can go there, put in your zip code, and every day you will get a forecast for Colorado Springs for today and tomorrow, what we anticipate the ozone and the fine particulates to do. If you want something that's got a little bit more to chew on, with more descriptive kind of text and predictions, then you want to sign up through one of our alerts on our the Ozone Action Day alerts that we have on our website. So that's the link. You can sign up for those alerts. But on top of that, you can also sign up for other alerts that we send out. We have a Colorado air quality listserv that we send out emails on, and that's going to give you other kinds of alerts. If we issue an air quality health advisory for wildfire smoke, you can get those alerts through that the email list, I should say. Stratospheric intrusions, and any kind of air quality alert, you can sign up for those on that link. And then here you can go directly to our webpage and get forecasts. And again, we forecast for Colorado Springs every day of the year.
And that goes how far out, Scott?
Today and tomorrow.
Okay, got it.
Yep. And I believe that's all. I think that's the last slide I have. And open it up to questions from there.
So that list also include the 3-day forecast?
It does not. So the voluntary emission reduction action emails, that's a different list, and that one you can contact Dino or you can contact myself. We are trying to keep, that is going to be, we're not opening that one up to the general public because it's still a bit of an experimental product, and we really want to avoid confusion, people getting the Ozone Action Day alerts and getting these 2 to 3 day forecasts, because we talk about different things on them. And sometimes those messages will get crossed. If we have to make a change, a last-minute change on the voluntary emission reduction actions, it might not be reflected on the email that we send out every day at 4 p.m. So at the time being, what we were saying is it's industry groups, it's public health agencies. We'd be more than happy to have you on that list, but it's not something that we are going to put out right now for everybody to look at because, again, it's a bit of an experimental product.
So kind of knowing the situation that we're in as a region, trying to avoid having a bad year this year, any suggestions for us as far as what we should be doing? We can't control wildfire. But we're taking the approach of, at least raising public awareness about this being an issue, public health issue, and let people know that there are advisories they should know about. There's a lot of outdoor recreation that happens here. We're Olympic City, USA, so trying to keep it healthy for folks, but also let them know that there are some voluntary measures that we could take on an individual household basis, individual business basis as needed. We on the right track? Are there other things we're missing? Or
I think just signing up for all the alerts that we have is a great way of doing it. And in tandem, signing up for the AirNow, the EnviroFlash alerts too, because that's you can very quickly get that email. And if we're saying Colorado Springs is going to be unhealthy for sensitive groups tomorrow, you can very quickly pick that out and then take action. I think if you with our Ozone Action Day alerts, I think our group, we need to do a better job of identifying Colorado Springs high ozone events. I think at times in the past, with some of the huge ozone issues we've had in Denver, Colorado Springs has probably been neglected a little bit in our forecast analysis, and that's got to change. And that's something I'm trying to stress to our meteorologists. But that being said, you can get that information from our Ozone Action Day alerts about what's going to happen in Colorado Springs. But if you want to get something quick and not have to read through a lot of stuff, I would suggest go to the EnviroFlash, sign up, put your email, your zip code in there. You'll get a Colorado Springs forecast every day, and it's coming from us.
I think the other thing it could do is, certainly we work closely with the Regional Air Quality Council in Denver, which I'm sure you know, and they have a lot of messaging that they put out on for high ozone days, such as, refuel your car in the evening, not in the middle of the day, mow your lawn in the evening, that type of messaging. So I think you could do a lot of that as well in conjunction with the different media and opportunities down here.
And it's a really good step that you're having some of the TV meteorologists in here today. Because that's the Regional Air Quality Council has done that as well, and getting them on board and getting the word out, because air quality sometimes is not a very sexy kind of subject, sure. And sometimes the TV meteorologists neglect to talk about it, and we're trying to change that.
Okay, good. Yeah, we've been sort of dialing into what the RAC is doing, and got some other good ideas as well. They've developed a lot of stuff as far as public outreach and awareness, simple tips that you can take. So kind of driving some of the same messages here. Yeah. Okay, good. Any other questions from the group?
Yeah, trying to better understand the 4 o'clock one day or 12 hours.
Yeah.
So what is it you're saying at 4 o'clock? Are you saying we have bad ozone now, or are you saying we're going to get bad
Could be
ozone?
either way. So that's something that we try to communicate. You send the Ozone Action Day alert, and in the description we talk about when ozone is going to be bad and what you should be doing and those kind of things. At times, we will identify it'll be clean today, and tomorrow we think is going to be bad. So we will issue an Ozone Action Day alert at 4 p.m. the day before. Some days it's bad today, it's going to be clean tomorrow. We'll issue at 4 p.m. today. It'll be bad both days. We'll issue an Ozone Action Day alert at 4 p.m. So it's that 4 p.m. to 4 p.m. time frame. And one of the reasons we've been kind of tied to that is that prescribed fire piece I was talking to you about. A lot of the the U.S. Forest Service, the BLM, the State Forest Service, they want to conduct burns. We don't want them to conduct burns when it's going to be bad ozone. So we have to let them know the day before. We can't get on there at 8 o'clock in the morning and say, can't burn today, because it takes a lot of planning to go in to conduct those burns. We totally realize that. So we need to make that decision the day before, and that's why we have a 4 p.m. to 4 p.m. There's been a lot of talk about changing that up, but right now that seems to be the formula that works for everybody.
And so as a follow-up, I'm wondering if it's a 4 p.m. saying today is a bad ozone day, how does that relate to telling the local population, don't mow your lawn in the afternoon? Well, it's 4 p.m. already. I'm probably already mowing.
When it's, yes. So we hopefully the day before we had issued an action day as well. So, but at times you get caught, and at that point the stress goes on the public health piece, because what's done is done. Now we want to protect public health. We always want to protect public health, but at that point, that becomes the stress. If we're talking about tomorrow, then the emission reduction action piece is a little bit bigger. So that's how that goes.
Maybe there's an important distinction in the messaging we're going to put out, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's, hey, we're alerting you to do something or stop doing something.
Right.
Versus
And we work with the DOT, and they put up the kind of the banners up on the highways. And one thing I've been really trying to stress with them is to get the right kind of messaging, like you were just talking about. I mean, talking about emission reduction actions when it's happening right now, it's over. That ship has sailed. Now we have to stress the public health part.
But you shouldn't go outside and exercise.
Right.
Have time to go on the incline.
Yes, exactly. There's, depending on if we're saying, today or tomorrow, there's a different message or at least a different message that should go to the forefront.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, definitely. And we've got a good working relationship with CDOT as well, so we've engaged them about using the variable message signs down here as well. So haven't quite closed the loop yet, but that's an opportunity. Yeah. Good. Questions from the group? Yeah, come on up, Lee. Yeah.
I'm going to
Sure.
abide by the rules.
Thank you.
Let's see, I do see a red light. I guess that means it's on. Good. Yeah, I've been following this process for the last 5 months, and I'm very pleased to see the ramp up that PPACG has done in the 5 months. It's really quite extraordinary. And Scott, your presentation was incredible. The ability to understand, particularly those 2 days in Colorado Springs and what was happening. I guess we have the meteorologist coming in here in just a few minutes. I hope some way, I mean, your presentation seems like it would hit them squarely. I don't know whether it makes sense to redo it or what you have in mind, Andy, but, you talk their language, and one thing they might be reluctant to say things if they don't really know what they're saying, but your background and your presentation really hits it right on the head. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I know I'm Robin Iser from the Sierra Club, Robin Iser, and I know all you good people here read the Gazette a couple of days ago, pollution degrading parks, and how much people are paying attention to this on high ozone days. They're seeing a significant decrease of people who are going to our parks all throughout Colorado. So this is, economically very important, too, that we be reducing and preventing this phenomenon because it's going to be affecting us economically over time.
Judith Rice-Jones, League of Women Voters. Answering my own question, the data I found is that we're 22nd nationally in terms of chronic lung disease. That may also be because we are the leanest state and a state where health consciousness is really high. So it's better than I expected. Thank you.
Ryan Trujillo, City of Colorado Springs. It was a phenomenal presentation. I think it educated all of us a little bit more on ozone. One of the conversations that we've had is trying to make our message simple. And I know that last conversation we had was about temperatures, and maybe it's above 85 degrees. That's when we try to get some messaging out there. But according to your presentation, that's not the case. How do you keep it simple on the messaging?
Good question. It's difficult. It really is, because you're mixing the public health piece message and the reduction message. Depending on when you're issuing it, it can be very complex, and I think that's why at times we're also trying to be geographically specific about where ozone is going to be at its highest, because as Gordon alluded to, in the city, ozone is usually not a big problem. It's the foothills that get hit. So we have to be really geographically specific in our messaging. Otherwise, if we just say, active children and adults, don't do this, it's not. It doesn't have the oomph unless we tell them where are the biggest impacts going to be, and that makes it incredibly difficult. So I don't know if that answered your question or not. It's tough. It's tough. And we're continually reevaluating how we do things, and there's always a better way of doing it. But
And maybe it is just getting the local meteorologist to say, high ozone days or not,
Yeah.
talk about an area and not get into specific temperatures and the winds and airflows, all the other factors that impact it.
yeah, and again, I keep on championing the EPA's EnviroFlash emails, but for a very simple forecast to tell you, is ozone going to be high today or is it going to be high tomorrow? And you can just very quickly see when ozone is going to be high and have a message based on that. Okay, if today's clean and tomorrow's dirty, this is what we're going to say. If it's dirty today and clean tomorrow, this is what we're going to say. And have those messages ready to go, and you can quickly put those out. It can be as simple as that. I haven't seen, we have only 2 monitors here in Colorado Springs, so it's a little bit more difficult to geographically see where the highest ozone is. But Manitou Springs and Academy, at times, I don't fully understand why one is much higher than the other. In some instances, like I showed you, it's more evident. But I think for the Colorado Springs area, I think not being as geographically specific, it's not as important as I think up north, where there are times where Fort Collins will have nothing, Denver will have huge numbers, and vice versa, where we really have to be geographically specific. If we see we're going to have higher ozone in Colorado Springs, the whole area should just blanket the whole area. Don't make the message more complex than it needs to be.
It seems that coming from you to us, Francois Rob representing Manitou Springs, for instance, what I'd want to receive is as much information as possible. And then the message going out to the Manitou Springs community, then it's our responsibility to filter and make it clear for whatever we think is relevant. So it would seem to me that we would want to receive from you as much detail as possible and leave the curation of the message to us, basically.
I would say sign up for both kinds of alerts then. So you'll have the basic one from the EPA just saying, here's what it is, here's what we're expecting, the ozone concentration. Then you get our email, and you can dive into the details a little bit more.
Okay.
One more question.
Yeah.
Scott, just given what you just said, that it's very hard to know why there is such a discrepancy between these 2 monitors, doesn't it behoove us to have a few more monitors in the Pikes Peak region?
I love data, so the more data I have, the better. But it's not. That's not the deciding factor.
Who do we advocate for more diverse geographic monitors?
Well, I guess going to the regional, going to the commission might be the first step in doing that.
Yeah, it's something we look at for areas, and a lot of times we'll do modeling in areas to see if it's worthwhile looking at other portions or not. A lot of it, like I said, with Colorado Springs, it's really based on our experience in the Denver metro area, where we're seeing the highest ozone. We've done a lot of monitoring on the east side of Colorado, of Denver at times, and out onto the plains, and the levels are generally much lower out there. Well, I shouldn't say much lower. They still get up to around 60 to 65, but they're certainly lower than what we see on the western side of the metro areas. So that's why we've kind of done that and not worried too much about the eastern side of the springs. Could we have more? In an ideal world, yeah, we would. But funding resources does come into play, a lot of it.
And if I could add to that, that's one of the reasons we have some of these special studies that we do that Gordon was referring to last year, and we're doing one in the Durango area right now, which is, yielding some pretty interesting results too. So, as we get these results in, that better informs us on if we need to move monitors, if we need additional monitors. So, that's what these special studies really help us with too.
Super. Yeah, go for it.
I also appreciate data as well, so I was just wondering if you had some sort of environmental tracking program, or is this data available online for anyone to review for the public?
For the air monitoring data itself? Yeah, on our website, you can, anybody can go onto it and see all the hourly data on there, yeah. along with the forecast that Scott puts out. So it's all on the same base website. Yeah.
Okay, good deal. This was fantastic. Great information, got us all up to speed and much better understanding of what's going on and some of our challenges. Why don't we take a real quick break, about 2 minutes. I'm assuming you guys are going to stick around because we've got hopefully some weather folks and meteorologists that we've invited that are going to join us as well, so we can talk about how to engage them and gauge their level of interest. So why don't we take a quick break and get back together in about 2 minutes. Thank you.
Would you folks send this to Andy so he can send it out in the presentation?
We have a PDF on that flash drive.
Yeah, we'll copy it and we'll get it out to everybody.
Maybe on the other side?
He's right there in that shirt. Yeah, in the blue.
Good party. You've seen it on here, right? You showed it. Oh, okay. That's where I go on. Yeah. I didn't even know they did that. I think they just recently added it. Last few months. And we probably don't need to record this part. It's
Yeah.
really interesting, but just
Yeah.
so that they're not feeling like there's stuff they can't say or whatever.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, I'm going to go stop it.
Okay, super. Thank you.